Hi, good morning. Good morning, welcome. I want to get started right away because we have a full program. It is an honor to have Professor Elon visiting us today from Richmond, Virginia. She's a world-renowned scholar in the area of organizational behavior and in the area of social psychology. And the thing that she's going to talk to us about today, about Mary Parker Follett, is extremely important. I mentioned her in the class before. She's one of the leading scholars in the history of our field, organizational behavior, and for some reason she's not as known as she should be. So going back to our premise of appreciative inquiry, the way I see it is that she is a seed with huge potential to continue to impact the field for decades and centuries. And what we're going to do today is shed some light on this seed, appreciate it so that it can grow. It is an honor again to have Professor Elon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tal. So first of all, 2 points of clarification. I'm not sure if it was clear. Tal was not talking about me, but he was talking about Mary Parker Follett. I still have a long way to go before I will become the hero that she is. And the second thing is that it's quite an honor to be introduced by your esteemed professor who has made the front page of the Boston Globe. So I think a round of applause. And you've got to go in, if you didn't see it on the web, if you're looking at the hard copy, there's a fabulous picture of him sitting in front of all of you, kind of on his chair. So I'm going to do it without a chair. And let's get started, because there really is a lot to say about Mary Parker Follett. What I'd like us to do today are 3 main things, 3 goals that I have. One is I'd like to integrate her insights with our current understanding of empowerment. The other thing is I'd also like to touch upon what really is empowerment and what are its contributions as well as its constraints, because we have already learned in organizations that it's not as trivial as we would like it to be to have empowered and empowering organizations. And the third thing is there's a paradox to empowerment, and I'd like to touch on it, and I'd like to share as well what recommendations Mary Parker Follett had for us regarding this paradox. So what is empowerment? Well, first of all, it's unbelievably popular, right? Everybody wants to be empowered, and we would like to have organizations that we work in and that we live within as empowering and empowered places to be part of. There's a lot of face validity, right? It sounds like it's a good thing, and we kind of feel very positively towards the concept of empowerment. However, when it comes to actual findings, what I'll share with you is that the story is mixed. There are multiple definitions. We will not go through all of them today. We will use primarily a process definition. And here's something very important. Empowerment is viewed both as a state and as a process. When we view it as a state, I am empowered right now, it's very static. It's very short term, and it's much easier to achieve. If that's the outcome we're looking for, we can get to it. We have an end goal that we focus on. We make sure that all of the things that we need to create, we create. We get the person or the group or the organization to be where we want it to be, and that's it. But empowerment is really a process. It's ongoing, it's long-term, and here's the primary challenge. It's reciprocal. When you have people who are engaged in the process, they are fully empowered, they are empowering, they are changing the very same situation that is creating the possibility for achieving empowerment. And that, of course, becomes a very complex situation. Now, before we continue, I would like us to do an exercise together. I would like you to identify an experience in which you either felt empowered or you felt disempowered. I'd also like you to identify a situation in which you helped others become empowered or disempowered. Before you do the exercise, let me tell you why we're doing it. Empowerment is so powerful that we have been able to create it within a 20-minute in-basket. An in-basket is an exercise that is used a lot in assessment centers where you give people a lot of information that a typical, for example, manager might encounter, and they need to respond. And in the way we created the materials, how were the emails written? What did the voicemail sound like? We could change people's performance based on how empowered they felt. 20 minutes, that's all it took. So, using the theater of the mind, right, what we all have in our minds and our experiences, I would like you now to recreate these situations that you have encountered. So I'd like you to think of a situation where you were empowered or disempowered, and a situation where you helped others become empowered or disempowered. I'd really like you to choose only 2 of the 4, right? You have 4 options here, because we don't have enough time for all 4. And here's what I'd like you to do, okay? So you're thinking now of 2 situations, and this is what I'd like you to jot down. What elements contributed to creating each situation, and how did you act and feel in each situation? And here's the caveat. Write down what really happened, not what you would have liked to have happened or what you think should have happened, right? You're sharing this only with yourself, right? So you can write the terrible things that may have happened or the terrible things that you may have felt, but you really need to focus on what really happened. So write it down. I'd like you to jot down what elements contributed to the situation and how did you act and feel. And focus on 2 because we don't have time for all 4. Now I'm going to need all of you to participate because you're also going to give me some feedback based on this exercise that we will then use for the rest of the talk. Okay, let's take another minute. You want as much detail as you can provide. You want it to be very rich. Okay, we're going to start with a show of hands. You had right 2 to remember. So let me ask, if we're going to number these as 1, 2, 3, and 4, how many of you focused on a situation where you were empowered? Raise your hands. Okay, a lot. How many of you focused when you were disempowered? Less. How many of you focused on when you helped others become empowered? Okay, did you see quite a lot again? How many of you focused on when you helped others become disempowered? Very few. Okay? This is very important to recognize. What does this mean? Does this mean that all of us sitting in here are just wonderful people and we never disempowered others? I hear some nods saying yes. Very good. So, is that possible? Are we just fabulous? Yes, we are fabulous. However, we all have a bias, and it's called attribution bias. Are you familiar with attribution bias? Are you familiar with attribution theory? Okay, so quickly. Attribution, yes? Attribution bias? Should I go over it? Okay, attribution bias is how we make attributions towards it. This is attribution, right? Towards what happens to us. But the bias is there's a difference between how we attribute what happens to us and how we attribute what happens to others. So for example, let's say I do very well on a test. Well, obviously I did well on the test. I'm smart, I studied well, I really get what they want in this course. Let's say I did not do well on the test. Well then, why didn't I do well on the test? Is it because I'm stupid? No. Why didn't I do well on the test? I didn't study. I had a really important party to go to. Or, what else? Bad test, right? That's a big one, right? The professor did not design a good test, or it was very skewed, and there was no way I could have known. Notice the difference. My attributions for my success are internal, and my attributions for my failure are external. And then here's where it gets interesting. Let's say you did well on the test. What am I going to say? I didn't do too well, but you did well. What am I going to say? What?
That, I don't know, it was easy for you, that the other test, I don't know, you got lucky.
Exactly. Did you hear? He got lucky. It was easy. Maybe it was similar to another course that you had already taken. Okay? So the attributions are external for your success, from my point of view. What about your failure? What am I going to say when you did not do well on the test? Right, you're not as smart. Right? So my attribution to your failure are internal. And that's what happens here. I am not as well aware of when I have contributed negatively. It's not that I've never done it. It's that I don't apply the same attribution as when I helped others become empowered. I actually have probably more or less equally done this at this stage of our lives. Leaders, as they become more experienced and develop, do much better here. That's one of the things that really engages us with leaders, is that they're empowering. We don't gravitate towards leaders who are disempowering, obviously. But here's the attribution bias. And one of the things about empowerment is to start recognizing when we empower others, as well as when we disempower others, because we want to reduce that quadrant where we disempower, and we want to increase the quadrant when we empower. Now, what did it take for us to be empowered and disempowered? Right? We were much more aware of that. These are questions that we need to answer, not just for ourselves, but also for others. And here are some things that people will share. But before that, one last thing about our role as leaders in terms of empowering and disempowering. Why is it so important that you know when you're empowering and disempowering? Why is it so important that we know? It's called self-monitoring. As we need to know how others view us, not how we want them to view us, but how do they really see us? How are my actions and my words interpreted by others? The leaders who do well are very high self-monitors. There's another thing that leaders do very well. They're very high on emotional intelligence. And we gravitate towards others who understand well how we're doing. We gravitate well towards others who understand our feelings. So we will gravitate to the leaders who not only can create this with us, but who also understand their role in it and understand how we feel and act in these situations. Unfortunately, we don't have time to hear from all of you how you felt and what created these situations, but I'd like to share with you what we've learned from research. What have we learned about empowered people? There's no need to copy this down. This is basically, probably you'll recognize a lot of your own words in here. These are reports from people. Empowered people will take risks. They're willing to experiment. They trust others. Empowered people are willing to look inward for improvement. They're not constantly looking outwards, externally, for knowledge and information. They look forward to going to work. Wow, novel, nice. They speak well of the organization. Very important for organizations. They acknowledge the work of others. They are capable of giving glory, of giving other people credit. Disempowered people frequently report they don't like sharing ideas with other people. They waste a lot of time double guessing, trying to figure out what needs to get done and if they're doing it the correct way. So rather than doing it, they're worried. They're hesitant to request help. They feel it will look bad. They rationalize failures. And there's a lot of external attributions, including blaming others when they don't do well. Now, there's also differences in feelings, right? These behaviors are also influenced also from the feelings. People who are empowered are recognized, respected, energized, consulted, and thanked. They're secure, they're capable, they're creative, they're supported by others, and they feel like they have discretion over time and their work, and they assume goodwill. Look at what you had jotted down, and my guess is that you recognize a lot of these from your own notes. This is very powerful. People are much more engaged in what they're doing, and compare it to people who are disempowered. Why do we hate that? Because we feel ignored. We feel like other people are using us. We are afraid that other people will be recognized and not us, and we become very focused on making sure that people see what we do, rather than focusing on achieving the goal. And frequently, we don't empower other people because we feel it's easier to do it ourselves, we'll also get recognized for it, than working with others and developing them. Now, here is what is so fascinating about Mary Parker Follett. Mary Parker Follett, 100 years ago, recognized all of this. And Mary Parker Follett, remember, lived in a time of Taylorism. Taylorism, exactly the opposite of all of this. She lived from 1863 to 1933. Most of her lectures took place in the 20s. She was a philosopher, but she was very grounded. She did a lot of practical work, and she engaged frequently with business people. I'd like you to also remember, not only was it a time of Taylorism, this is a woman in a time when women really didn't have a significant role and were not considered to be valid in the business world, right? They were not embraced, and yet she was so successful. She already then started talking about what we have focused on for the last decade in terms of empowerment. And at the core was her belief that people wish to self-govern, which is completely the opposite of what Taylorism said. And more than that, she said people wish to self-govern. They want to be able to contribute. They want to be able to achieve. They want to be able to grow. Yes? Oh, sorry. Okay. Taylorism, Taylor and... Is there anybody, by the way, here who's familiar? Yes?
Frederick Taylor used he invented this sort of term called scientific management, which treated people like cogs in a machine, and it just power.
Did you all hear? Taylor, thank you very much. That was excellent. Frederick Taylor developed the idea of scientific management, which is, if you kind of think of it, is the origins of the assembly line, where he basically said we can break down the work into its smallest components. And then we will take people and use them in the way that is the most efficient. And as a result, people were brought into work to be efficient. And what Mary Parker Follett pointed out was the whole person was not coming to work. Right? They were in a way working nearly like robots. And what she pointed out was, if you looked at these men, primarily men who were working, these were men who were very active in their social organizations, in their religious organizations, very active in their family. They had a lot to contribute, and organizations were not bringing that in. They were using them in scientific management in order to be efficient. So that's why, if you think of the setting, her work is unbelievable. Thank you for that question and for the excellent answer. Now, she believed all people wished to self-govern, which is kind of the theory X and theory Y, which I don't know if you had a chance to touch on. But we came back to this question about 50, 60 years later. But she had already said, no, actually, people are not lazy. People want to grow. But she said more than that. Not only do people want to self-govern, but when you give them the opportunity to do that, the group that they are part of develops. Because if you truly allow it, it will not be done at the expense of others, but on the contrary, they will contribute, right? You utilize all these wonderful strengths, achievements, and characteristics, and the group develops, the organization develops, and she called it a dialectic process, kind of the term that Hegel uses, a dialectic process. You have two different forces coming together, and together they create a completely different force, which again then it transforms the situation, and again another force will come in and there'll be another transformation. And here's another thing that she said, because people wish to self-govern, and it's a dialectic process within groups and organizations, the role of businesses is to develop individuals. And not only because society will be better that way, but because the organizations will also be better. Because you're gaining from all of the strengths that are being brought together in this dialectic process. Okay, fabulous. What I just said now, right? Doesn't that sound like common sense? I mean, this is obvious. This should work. I would think. I'm not seeing any nods. I would think this seems pretty straightforward, at least in our era. You guys are going, maybe not. Well, obviously, you're very wise, right? Maybe not, because it hasn't happened. We're not seeing this. And she said this already 100 years ago. So what is going on? Well, there are lots of fears. People are afraid of empowering others. They're afraid of losing control, right? If it's a reciprocal dialectic process, you are no longer in control. You have to trust the situation. You're afraid others will get recognized. You're not going to be center stage. You're afraid that you will not be viewed as powerful if you let others develop. And what is going to happen? You might lose your job. And again, let me share with you something about leaders. Some of the best leaders, what they do so well is succession planning. Because they say, if I can develop, mentor somebody to do my job, it's not that I'm going to be out of a job. It's that then I have opportunities to do other things. Right? Remember her assumption, everybody's interested in self-growth. So if you hang on to what you have, there's no self-growth, there's stagnation. And successful leaders always have succession planning. Always have people who can take their place so that they can do more. The other fears we have, oh my gosh, if I'm empowered, I might need to work more, other people might resent me, and you know what? There might not be any rewards. And this is critical. We know about motivation. How many of you have seen the movie Office Space? Ah, excellent. Okay? You remember the guy, right? He was brilliant at figuring out what was rewarded in this organization. Anybody remember how many minutes a week did he figure out he needed to work in order to get paid? Anybody remember, bud? How many? Excellent. It was about 15 to 20 minutes. That is the amount of work he figured out he needed to do in an organization that he belonged to in order to get rewarded. What does this mean? People are very astute about what gets rewarded in organization. We will respond behaviorally to what gets rewarded, not what people tell us is rewarded. So if people say, we pay here if you're very creative, but we see that people who are creative and take risks, but sometimes their inventions don't work and then they lose their job, guess what? We realize that's not really what's rewarded. So actually, by the way, it's an interesting dilemma that organizations have. How do you reward people to be innovative? How do you reward them? There's huge risk involved. And nobody wants to be a failure. So one of the very successful organizations in terms of being innovative is 3M. Part of their reward structure is that you need to fail a certain percentage of the time. Why? In order to encourage you to take risk. Because if all you're doing is incremental change, that's not very innovative. So the rewards need to come to the risk. So why are people afraid of empowerment? Because just saying take risks, saying that we trust you is not enough. We really look for what gets rewarded. We're smart. So what is empowerment? Okay, we talked a lot about what are some of the constraints, what are some of the difficulties. This definition focuses on empowerment as a process. It's ongoing. It's enhancing and energizing. It goes back to Follet. People want to self-govern. It's context specific. How we develop it will depend on the culture of the organization, as well as on the functions of the individuals who are part of the process. It expands feeling of trust and control in oneself, as well as in one's organization. We have to have that, not just in ourselves, but we also have to believe in the organization as that supportive environment where the rewards are really going to be what is valued. What is valued will get rewarded. And the outcomes that everybody's all interested in, of course, is in performance and satisfaction. Now, how do we really do this? Right? This sounds straightforward. And remember, it's a process. It's ongoing, even though as the definition, it's kind of a one slide, but it's ongoing. So how do we get there? Well, what does Follet tell us? Number one, you have to focus on the function. What do people actually do? Think task design. What do people actually do? That's what you need to focus on. Not on status, not on hierarchy. You need to remember all members are equal and they must share a common goal. What do we have in common here? That's what we need to highlight. That's where the focus needs to be on. Not on what you're going to get and what I'm going to get. We will get these things. There are outcomes that we're interested in our organization. But what do we have in common? So we can pull together. That's one of the reasons why mission statements are so important. It's one of the reasons why it's so important that leaders can share their vision so eloquently, why they need to be such strong communicators. Information is freely exchanged. Information is power in organizations. It takes a lot to be willing to give up and share that power. And it's viewed as infinite. If I share, I'm not giving up on anything. I'm actually creating more. So if I do well in this course, I'm also more than happy to help others do well in this course because it's not going to take away from my doing well. I have to believe that in order to help others, because otherwise I'm torn between two different kinds of rewards, the reward of helping others and the rewards of being the star in the class. And it's an ongoing process. Okay, I want to break this down a little bit to its components. First of all, the context is very important. What's the culture of the organization? What's the experience of the individuals? How many people are involved? Let's look at the organizational level. We need these things to happen. It's interpersonal. What happens? Number one, information. Okay, this is a very important distinction that I'm going to make. People think that just sharing information enough. It's not. We're actually overloaded by information. And that was one of the biggest mistakes with empowerment in the early 90s, is they were just pushing information down. But nobody was prioritizing it. People just went into information overload and actually did not do as well. And you know what? They were giving the wrong information. There are two kinds of information that we need to focus in organizations. One is ambiguous information, information that is open to interpretation, and the other is concrete information, the objective information, something that we just pass on. Which do you think is more important in an organization? Ambiguous, absolutely. And you know why? Because that's where each individual's added value comes to the organization. How do you understand what needs to get done? How do you interpret the situation? That ambiguous information allows the opportunity for growth. And that's what we need to share, and that's what people are afraid of sharing, because they don't want to give up that opportunity, because that's the opportunity for making a difference, that's an opportunity for making a decision. For example, ideas for growing the organization's market share. All of that is going to be ambiguous. What is our current market share? That number, say, 11%, that's concrete. So we need to know what we're trying to do, and we need to be willing to share it. And here is something that I have found in my work that is mind-boggling. When you ask people which information do they share with people that work with them, they say, of course, both, ambiguous and concrete, with the primary focus on ambiguous. But when you actually look at what they share, what do they actually share? They share the concrete. They're not aware of the distinction that they're making, which is not in the favor of the organization, nor in theirs. There's a paradox that what people think they're doing and what they want to do are not the same. Why am I spending so much time on this? To be successful leaders, we need to be high self-monitors, and sharing the correct information is critical. We need to be able to build together the organization, and for that we need to be willing to share something that is difficult for us to focus on, because it's not clear and we're worried that it will be misunderstood. Obviously, we need to share responsibilities and active belief. What is active belief? Active belief is knowing the strength of other people that you work with and building on these strengths. Think of those people who saw in you possibilities that you did not see yourself. They may have actually been in the quadrant that you identified as feeling empowered. We gravitate to these people because they help us grow. A strong leader is a leader who can see strengths in us that maybe we ourselves don't see, and who allows us to use these strengths. That is active belief. They have full trust in those set of capabilities and they use them. Now, what is this all mediated by? It's mediated by some intrapsychic constructs: self-efficacy, locus of control, self-esteem. Of the three, the one that is the most easiest to change in the organizational context is self-efficacy, our feeling of belief that we can succeed in a particular task. So if I want to develop my communication skills, training, working with a coach can help me become a better communicator. And I can believe that, and that helps me with this process. Self-esteem is a much more stable trait, and most people in American culture actually have relatively high self-esteem. Locus of control is who I think controls my actions. Is it me? Is it internal? Or is it my husband, my professor, God, luck, karma? So all external. Most of you most likely have relatively high internal locus of control. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be sitting here. Because if you had high external locus of control, you wouldn't have done what it takes to be sitting here. So, we know that the people in the organization who probably will achieve great self-growth are people with moderately high levels of internal self-growth. Why not very high levels of locus of control? Why did I say relatively high? Why didn't I say high? Why not high internal locus of control? Why is that not the sign for success? Right? Where you believe you control everything. You believe you control your destiny completely. Okay, 2 points. One is it leads to a lot of frustration, right? You know what? There are some things that we just can't overcome. And 2, it might also, that frustration might not allow me to see my failures and to grow. And that's correct. There are things that are beyond our control, and we need to accept that they are beyond our control and not spin our wheels trying to change things that we cannot change. And a word to the wise, I'm guessing most of you are not married. Yes, how many people here have a significant other? Okay, minority. So a word to the wise on this. When you decide to live your life with somebody, right, you decide to join in partnership for the rest of your life, don't say to yourself, oh, this person is perfect for me, except for some issues that I know I will be able to change. If you hear yourself saying, well, I really need to change X, Y, Z, you need to remember that even though you might have moderately high internal locus of control, you can't control everything, and changing other people is very hard. So either you change yourself and you accept, right? And you accept that even though you're high in internal locus of control, you're not completely in control of everything. So this is what we need to make sure. People with high external locus of control, this is very hard. This is very, very hard because they think that most of it is not about them, but the majority of the population is not there. Okay, so when we measure the population, that's not, most of the people are not externals, but rather we're going to see a lot more internals. Now, okay, so we get, we're activating this. It has to be mediated by these three. And what are we hoping for? Satisfaction and unique performance outcomes. Now, let's talk about each one of these. Satisfaction. Too frequently, organizations measure satisfaction as a proxy for performance. It's easier to measure attitudes than it is to measure behaviors. Right? How do I measure attitudes? I just ask you. So I ask, do you like this organization? Do you want to be part of this organization? And if you say yes, right, you're satisfied, I say empowerment has been successful. But is that really all that we're interested in organizations? No. We also are interested not only in satisfaction, and we are, by the way, interested in satisfaction because we're interested in people being happy in the context of work for the reasons that I've already said, as well as their turnover and absenteeism goes down. But we're also interested in performance that is relevant to the organization. Why unique? Because you need to decide in advance what changes you would like to see. Blanket changes rarely occur. What are your priorities? What are the first things that you would like to see changed in the organization? Those are the unique performance outcomes. And people have control over them. Are you guys familiar with expectancy theory of motivation? So let me brief you. Tal? Expectancy theory? Okay, let me briefly tell you about expectancy theory of motivation because it's very relevant here. People will put forth effort into behaviors that they know will create performance. Think of you studying for a test. How are you going to study for the test? You're going to study for the test in a way that you believe will help you get a good grade. You're not necessarily going to spend all of your time studying just one thing that's interesting for you. Because although you might learn a lot from that one thing, and although we were all going to say, well, that promotes in-depth learning and that's wonderful, you're going to say, wait a minute. The behavior right now that I'm seeking is a grade on the test. And that's very rational and very relevant. That's how you will decide where to put forth effort. Leaders need to tell people in organizations what sort of effort is necessary in this organization in order to perform well. And saying working hard is not enough. Why? Because it's too general. What does that mean, work hard? Tell me what sort of working hard. So, for example, if Tal wanted to help me out prepare this lecture today, he could have said, oh, just be funny. Which, of course, I'm sure he wouldn't have said that because he's just intrinsically funny, and I think it just happens to him. But that wouldn't have helped me. So what am I supposed to do? Go up and open joke books? I mean, that would have been lame. It would have been unsuccessful. Right? I would have probably needed something much more specific in order to tailor my behavior. But if I received that from my manager, from my leader, I would know how better to behave in a way that I could perform. And then when I perform well, there are the rewards. That's expectancy theory. Expectancy theory says great leaders know how to motivate people by sharing with them the kind of effort that is necessary for performance that will lead to rewards in the organizations. And that is the awareness intervention. If you want to empower people, tell them exactly what to focus on. It's volitional. We have choice. And we're smart. And this is not a guessing game. So tell us what it is we are focusing on, what we want to improve. And Follet said that. Follet said people want to contribute. We need to share with them how. Now, here's another thing that's not in the model but is very important. We need to assume that people have KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. If they don't, it's the responsibility of the organization to train them. Knowledge, skills, and abilities. We cannot perform if we don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we need, and organizations need to provide that. They cannot assume that people will get it on their own. But at the same time, I'll share with you something that Andy Grove, who used to head Intel, said. He said this to all of us. Always look to the future and say, how are things going to change to make sure that I have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the future will need? So I will have something to provide in the future that may not be the same as what is necessary now. Okay, this is our empowerment process, and this is our paradox. The paradox is that the very same conditions that allow one individual to provide power, to share power, undermines the essence of empowerment. Because it means that one party has more than another. And that's the paradox. Because when one party has more than the other, they're superior, there's a status difference, there's a power difference, and it allows them to judge others, it allows them to provide or limit resources, and withhold information. So there isn't true redistribution. It's still hierarchical. And that's the paradox. And that's one of the biggest challenges of true empowerment. Follett, 100 years ago, recognized this and already spoke of this paradox and how to overcome it. Here's what she said. She said it's continuous interactive. Influence is the ability to change another person's behavior. It's a positive thing if the outcome is positive. Accept that people throughout the organization will influence you because of their function, not because of their status, because of what they do in the organization. They will influence you just as you influence them. The other thing is the role of the leader is not to provide power. The role of the leader is to take away obstacles. The role of the leader is to open the path for others to provide and to grow. Those are the great leaders. They see what we need, and they provide the resources, and they take away any impediments. Expect and create change. Expect the dialectic. This whole concept of constant change, it's about that. We cannot always know what the future will hold, but as long as we're going with it, and that's what Andy Grove said, look for the inflection points. Look for how things will change in ways that are hard for us to predict today. And I'd like to share with you that this whole notion goes back again to job design, right? It goes back to what is the person's function? What are they doing that is contributing? How do we build from that? And the other thing that you might notice both from this and from the definition and the model that we just looked at is we're really looking at a process. And Terry Mitchell, who's written a lot about motivation in organizations, says, in general, one of the biggest mistakes that managers and leaders do in organizations, when they try and fix problems, they try and fix the individual, frequently by firing them, when really the problems usually lie in the organizational process. But why don't they look at the organizational process? Well, it's harder, and frequently they're the ones who designed it. So that's really where we need to look at it. And how would we look at process with empowerment? I would suggest we do it with 4 M's. The micro level. Let's look at the individual. Do they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities? Can we help develop their self-efficacy? Then we need to look at the meso level, the relational. Active belief, sharing of information and responsibility. Then we look at the macro level, the values of the organization, the culture of the organization. And the last M is the most problematic. It's the misnomers, bogus empowerment. Are we really striving here for empowerment? Is everybody in the organization committed to doing what needs to be done? Does everybody in the organization at all levels have the tools? Are we looking at the function, or are we looking at hierarchy? Are we focusing on our little empire, or are we focusing on growing people and removing the impediments? Here are the things in an organization that everybody needs to be able to answer. Why do we do things the way we do here? Can we understand all these processes? What gets rewarded? And is what we reward here really what needs to be rewarded? And those of you who are interested in this, there's an excellent article by Steve Kerr called The Folly of Rewarding A When Expecting B. Excellent. It talks about how organizations backfire because their reward structures are not designed well. How do I access the resources? What are the mission, values, and goals? If not everybody can answer it, then we have a problem, is they don't have a common agenda. And they don't know what exactly are the behaviors that are necessary. Think expectancy theory. What do we need to achieve our mission, our goals, and our values? Leaders have to be very clear what are the values of the organizations. And let me share with you more than that. Some research that I've recently done says, you know what? When we look at leaders after they die, after they're dead, they're always thought of better. We always say they were better leaders after they're dead, right? We exalt them. Except in one situation, when they were morally corrupted. After death, there's extrematization. We have no tolerance for values that are not aligned with ours or with what needs to get done. We will be quiet about it for a variety of different reasons sometimes. There are very few whistleblowers. But when a leader dies and it turns out that they were corrupted and immoral, we damn them. And that's something that I would like you all to remember, is to achieve, we need to make sure as leaders that we're very clear about the values and what we're trying to do. And as leaders, this is a Chinese poem, go to the people, learn from them, love them, start with what they know, build on what they have. But of the best leaders, when their task is accomplished, their work is done, the people will remark, we have done it ourselves. And we have another minute, and this is what I would like you to do. We have done it ourselves. What is the one thing you want to take away from the last 50 minutes? Neural networks. We cannot remember everything. Take one thing. Think back to the exercise, the theater of the mind. What do you want to take away to be better able to empower other people? And also your own self-growth, to empower yourself. Jot down the one thing that made the biggest impact on you today. And my parting words to you are, certain understandings between leaders and followers are fragile. The understanding, for example, that real participation for all of us is a process of becoming and never arriving. And good luck to you all. Wow. Thank you.